Hello, everyone, and welcome to Open Session, MSBA's series of video conversations on issues related to the coronavirus pandemic and its implications for schools throughout our state. And joining us today is the Commissioner of Education for the state of Missouri, Dr. Margie Vandeven. And Margie, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Brent. Good to see you.
I know your schedule's a little hectic these days, so appreciate you spending some time with us. First of all, Margie, of course, schools throughout the state are closed for the remainder of the school year. School districts are finding creative ways to deliver instruction to kids, including virtual instruction and other ways. How would you assess what's going on in our state right now regarding the delivery of instruction to kids?
Well, first of all, I do want to say thank you to so many who have worked so hard to make sure that we continue to educate our children throughout the state. These are challenging times, no doubt about it, but I really believe that our school leaders, our board members, thank you, and our teachers are working very, very hard to reach our children. I will tell you, it's not without challenge, and one of those areas that we have found to be a particular challenge is that of internet access. Obviously, when you're doing remote learning, there are many, many tools that we can use through the use of the computer, as we're doing today, having this face-to-face discussion. And that doesn't happen for some of our students who don't have that access. So I think that's one of the areas that we're finding the biggest challenge right now. And the state has issued a survey. As of yesterday, out of the 555 LEAs, we had heard back from 450 of the LEAs. We're hoping to get 100% there, so I'll give you an update when we have it. But numbers tell us today that about 21% of our students do not have sufficient internet resources or capabilities, and we're trying to identify what that really means. How can we work together as a state to solve that in case we ever want to expand on this opportunity for kids, or if we ever find ourselves into a similar situation. So roughly 21% are continuing to struggle with that internet access, and those of the schools that do not have it, they knew it from the start, have been thinking, as you said, of very, very creative ways to provide that opportunity to our students and other pathways. The other thing I'll just quickly mention, in addition to the limited access for some of these students, the other area that we pinpointed is this is just a different way of doing business. And so helping our teachers learn that, so they talk a lot about professional development and helping our teachers learn how to teach just a little bit differently. And again, thank you to so many who have stepped up and have come so far through these. I can't believe it's only been 7 weeks. I don't want to date this clip, but it's been 7 weeks since our last State Board of Education meeting, when we were just starting to talk about what would a potential school closure look like.
Right. And Margie, regarding that, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, you all have been compiling some resources that are available for teachers, for parents, for students to assist with online learning, haven't you?
We have, and I'm so grateful to our Office of College and Career Readiness. Our team has really stepped up and immediately launched some resources in the core areas. They've expanded on that. Our career technical education groups have worked very, very hard to put some materials out there. And most recently, our guidance counseling team has released some information on social emotional learning. That has certainly been an area of concern for so many across our state. And so they've put together some resources for both teachers and for parents to access. That's available right on our website.
Mm-hmm. And an immediate issue that schools are facing, Margie, is summer school coming up, and some have already made plans for summer school. It looks like some districts may be doing it online. What guidance do you have for districts on summer school?
Yeah, so we put together a task force to really look at what are the big questions around summer school. And the response that we got back was really 3 points. One was to allow districts and charters the greatest flexibility possible for calendar development for their summer school. And if we were going to do face-to-face, establish those expectations. And the same holds true for if schools were going to continue to do this remote learning opportunity during summer school. Let's set up some very specific expectations of what that delivery and actual education process, including that feedback loop, should look like for our students. So we have compiled that information. The area that I would say I think our districts are being most creative in right now is thinking about, I know everyone is eager to get kids back into their buildings, but they have to think about how to do that safely. There's still a lot of discussion around what could or would social distancing look like for some of our youngest learners in particular. So are there opportunities to do summer school in staggered ways, to do a blended approach? And I think everybody's looking at this and trying to be as creative as possible to meet the needs of their individual communities, and we support that.
Mm-hmm. And one of the big questions everybody's wondering about, Margie, are the school buildings going to be open for the new school year come August?
Yeah,
what do we know about that?
We don't know. I'm going to tell you flat out, we don't know for certain, but certainly that is the goal. I mean, I think we've heard a lot of discussion about that extension of summer school. Most people have summer school in June a lot of times, so they were saying, could we do it in July or August? People seem to feel a little more comfortable about knowing more in July and August, so I'm sure hopeful about the fall and making sure that we can return into those buildings in the fall. But it will look a little bit differently, I'm sure. I mean, we have to make sure that we have some specific protocols in place, and then again, not to be overly of an alarmist here, but be thinking as board members, if this should surface again in the fall, what procedures do we have in place? How will we respond? So I think it's certainly not too early to start thinking about and planning for that.
Mm-hmm. And another issue districts are wondering about, Margie, related to that is the school start date. I know there was some discussion at a recent state board meeting about that issue. Will there be flexibility on that? Do we know that yet?
Yeah, so that is a really important question right now. You'll know more about that following our May 12th board meeting, and our board seemed open to that idea. It is in statute that the State Board of Education has the authority to waive that start date for extenuating circumstances. Interestingly enough, we did get a request for waiving that date in March at the March board meeting, and we denied that request because the extenuating circumstances I did not believe were demonstrated. This certainly does feel like an extenuating circumstance, and I believe the discussion yesterday from the board was, let's figure out a way, again, up to local districts to be thinking about what makes the most sense. If you're starting to look at the research right now, it's very early to talk about COVID learning loss, but the summer learning loss it's been around for a long period of time now, that when kids go without being in school for a period of time, we can see summer learning slides, we can see backward decline. We want to make sure we can get our kids back in schools as quickly as possible. So if school districts are seeing that makes sense, if local officials are saying that makes sense, it does seem to make sense to allow for that to occur.
And speaking of waivers, Margie, there have been some waivers that have been put in place for school districts to deal with this situation. Can you tell us about some of those?
Sure. And I think once it became clear that schools were going to be closing, that there was a potential that schools would be closed for the remainder of the year, we worked very quickly to get some of those waivers in place. First, the big one that everyone heard about was, let's cancel statewide assessments. And we got that waiver from the U.S. Department of Education. That was really a call from teachers and others who were just feeling so overwhelmed by this whole new way of teaching and doing. And we said, let's take that off the plate. And another big waiver that we sought immediately was for feeding our children. So USDA was very cooperative. We sought that. We got our first waiver by March the 15th because we wanted to make sure that through this process, schools could continue to feed children in various manners that might not have met the typical requirements of school foods and nutrition. So got a number of those waivers put into place. And then thinking in terms of what about those 2020 seniors who won't be able to come back to school potentially. There are a number of requirements in state statute and other places, CPR requirements, different kinds of testing requirements before they can earn their diploma. What we were very clear about was local school boards, we did not waive the 24 credit requirement. Local school boards should be granted the flexibility to determine when it was appropriate to honor that credit and issue that diploma. So we tried to remove any obstacles at the state level, and local school boards then would have the authority to issue the diploma. So that's kind of a fine balance. You want to make sure that you're not penalizing students, and you want to make sure that diploma still means something to the community when they exit with that. And to date, it sounds like school districts are doing a great job in finding that appropriate balance. The other last waiver, another point I'll make is our student teachers. So, there's just a lot of tentacles to this when you close buildings. And so student teachers who needed to get maybe their last 4 weeks of student teaching in front of students in the classroom, we applied for a waiver to allow the educator preparation programs to do that a little bit differently. And there are other practicums that occur in our schools where professions needed to figure out how to work around that different situation. So a number of things, I didn't get them all. Lots of flexibility in spending. We got a number of waivers from the federal government, a lot of flexibility on how districts could use their title dollars. Again, we kind of saw our role as let's try to remove any barriers that are going to be a challenge in these next couple of months.
Speaking of federal dollars, we do have some coming into Missouri, Margie, under the CARES Act, I think $208 million. Tell us about that and how that will be distributed.
Yeah, so we just recently received the guidance on the $208 million that will go to our K-12 LEAs. That will be distributed through 90% of those dollars will be distributed through the Title I formula. And sort of the key key point I'd like to make here is that they were distributed through the Title I formula because that's just a pretty good way of getting funding out the door, and that was determined in the law. In the federal law, but they're not title dollars. So there's a lot more flexibility with these dollars on how you can spend them at the local level. The other point that I'd like to make is that they did make the funding, although we do not actually have it yet in the state, they have made it clear that we will be allowed to do reimbursable items as early as March the 13th when President Trump declared the emergency for the nation. And so that was another real helpful component. So although you don't really have it yet, we do know that it's on its way, and we're working on that application at the state level. And then LEAs will be asked to submit we're trying to streamline it, make it as easy as possible, but also to be somewhat thoughtful. So more of a checklist, a couple of questions on how do you see you'll be wanting to utilize these funds in your local district or charter.
Mm-hmm. And regarding funding on the state level, Margie, as we're speaking, the General Assembly is meeting, trying to come up with a budget. Their target is something like $700 million cut from the budget recommendations earlier that they were considering. Our districts are, of course, wondering about that. But at this point, what can we tell them about state funding?
Yeah, I get it. I'm just going to tell you, we know it's going to be a challenge. And we don't know the degree of the challenge yet. And so I would just, exert extreme caution. And if you look at state funding, K-12 education is certainly a key part of that. K-12 is absolutely one of the best investments the state can make. So we'll do everything to continue to advocate for the importance of those funds. And yet we also are aware that there's a lot of economic uncertainty out there at this time. So I would continue to exercise extreme caution until we know a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. On the broader picture, Margie, as Commissioner of Education, looking ahead, I mean, it's a little early maybe to be talking about these sorts of things, but do you see this whole situation as changing education in the future?
Absolutely. I don't think we could walk away from an event like this and not think it's going to change the way we provide education services for our kids. We've learned a lot through the process. It's been as of March 19th, all schools in the state were closed. So we haven't been at this for a very long period of time. But I think we have learned that there are things we can do differently. And, I want to continue to emphasize this is by no means me saying that I think we should plan to do everything electronically. One of the key things I think we've learned through this is the importance of that teacher in the classroom, that importance of the relationships our kids have with one another. You know, I tell this story, but it's just heart-wrenching to me to see these kids. I've heard of parents tearing up watching their kids on Zoom calls, interacting with their classmates because they miss them so much. We will never, I believe, never find a complete replacement for being together for certain things. On the other hand, there are other components. There are many things we can do now remotely that we understand. There are solutions. You know, we say there's so much put on us at the school district. Well, what can we take off now? I think we should look at that. I think we should look at many questions around motivation and what it takes, what's the driving factor of education, and what a gift public education really is. And so how do we, again, take that energy of what we've learned and help our kids see that learning is and having this opportunity is really a gift. And so the accountability metrics have been really important, but I also think we should look at what is the driving force on why we're in school and why we're learning. So those are a couple of big components that we'll be looking at. The other piece that I'd like to add is I think it's given us as communities as whole, as the nation as whole, what really matters. And so what are these essential skills that we find ourselves really needing in a time of dire need? And so I think that would give us a little bit more focus as well on what we're trying to teach our children and make sure that they are prepared for this world that they are entering.
Commissioner of Education Margie Vandeven, thank you so much for being with us today with your hectic schedule. Thank you for your leadership during this very challenging time, and the whole Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for all the great work you and your staff are doing. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, Brent, and I appreciate you very much and all of our local school board members out there and all the good work that you do. Thank you so much to you and MSBA as well.
Thanks, Margie. And we thank you for joining us on this latest edition of MSBA's Open Session.